Hi there, I'm Eddie Spuhghetti. Not only your favorite retro horror host, but also your favorite Hollywood producer. I'm just taking a cold feed break here as production takes a break of its own on All Dogs Go to Heaven 4, Dog Outta Hell. I'm sick of dogs right now. Let's talk about something different, other than dogs. Let's talk about this Betamax copy of Risky Business. Did you notice something? The manifestation of style. The preponderance of mood, perhaps? Risky Business has a shitload going for it, but for some reason doesn't always seem to make the lists when it comes to pivotal motion pictures from the 1980s. My guess is it has to do with the lead eventually going a bit bonkers, sorta adding a bit of a shade to the film's true pop culture significance. It did make an impact in the fashion world with revitalizing Ray-Ban's Wayfarer sunglasses, and a lot of its significance got outweighed by this one scene in particular that just doesn't make any sense.
Just take that old hoop and trade it in.
But I'll get to that, just put yourself on cruise control for a bit. 1982, technology is in another step of evolution as Time magazine named the computer as Man of the Year. Michael Jackson releases Thriller and becomes the end-all be-all of entertainment. Save the Whales succeeds in suspending commercial whaling while the Weather Channel has its first broadcast ever, starting the long-lasting trend of scaring the shit out of people with tornado warnings. And that summer in Chicago, director Paul Brickman began shooting a movie called Risky Business. A coming-of-age story, Risky Business is about suburban high school student Joel Goodson, played by a then-unknown Tom Cruise. Joel's just about to graduate and move on to a post-secondary education, but instead of celebrating, he can't help but worry about where his life will go. Education, career, sex, love. It's all cycling around in his head as he does the same with no sense of direction. When his parents leave to visit relatives, Joel's buddy Miles, played by Curtis Armstrong, pressures him into calling a sex worker, which eventually leads to Joel meeting Lana, played by Rebecca De Mornay. It's through her straightforward attitude that Joel is introduced to the adult world of free enterprise, and that sometimes you just need to say what the fuck and make your move. A lot of the behind-the-scenes information about the production of this film comes from actor Curtis Armstrong's book, Revenge of the Nerd, or The Singular Adventures of the Man Who Would Be Booger. Through his memoirs, Armstrong takes a chapter's worth to recount his big break into show business, interactions with young Tom Cruise, and various observations regarding situations that occurred during filming. Paul Brickman initially conceived the idea for Risky Business after being influenced by the film The Conformist and identifying problems with then-popular teen sex comedies.
We can only show you this much of the locker room scene.
He wanted to mix the tone of The Conformist with humor and sexuality, keeping things dark and moody all the way from the imagery to the score. The project was developed under the title White Boys Off the Lake at Warner Brothers Studios, but they felt that the title sounded too much like an off-Broadway play and generally weren't interested enough in producing the thing. Enter David Geffen. Geffen at this point was highly respected in the entertainment business for his work in the music industry with Geffen Records and his former ties with Warner Brothers as vice chairman. While no other studio wanted to touch Brickman's project, Geffen was all for it and made a deal with Warner Brothers to distribute the film, while the Geffen Film Company would co-produce it. Casting began around the start of 1982 as the process would take up to 6 months to complete in time for principal photography to start in the summer. While on location for The Outsiders, Tom Cruise received the script for Risky Business and soon joined the cast alongside Curtis Armstrong and Bronson Pinchot, both who had reportedly nailed their auditions. Rebecca De Mornay had tested for the role of Lana very early on, but was initially turned away. She was brought back in to test alongside Cruise and then hired due to their chemistry. It was noted that she could push Tom around a bit, and his heated reactions involving moments of vulnerability is what sold it all. For the lead antagonist Guido, Joe Pantoliano was cast, but came close to being let go later on in production. During a live discussion panel a few years ago, Brickman would recount that one night over dinner, Geffen confided in him that he wanted Pantoliano fired. Brickman refused, and they basically went back and forth on it until it was let go. He never knew why that discussion came up, but assumed some of the producers didn't feel Pantoliano was threatening enough. Though Geffen was, in general, really good about letting Brickman do his own thing, this would be one of a few conflicts that would arise. The other would impact the picture entirely, but we'll get to that in a bit. Cruise control. Stay on cruise control. As for Tom Cruise, after accepting the lead of Joel Goodson, he began a physical regimen to better look the part. So for years before I got into Tinseltown, I used to use IMDb all the time, and I remember reading that Cruise did this weird diet of sorts to make himself look like a teenager, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird, because like, wasn't he a teenager when the movie was made? I mean, what's with the method acting De Niro crap? Like, that sounds as ridiculous as me letting Eddie Deason walk in here. But it kind of worked. Cruise was 19 at the time. Look at a photo of him in The Outsiders and compare his look in Risky Business. He does indeed appear physically different. Producers wanted him to look more teenage, so he lost 10 pounds by working out 7 days a week, then completely cut that off and started eating fat-heavy foods. The end result here is fake baby fat, which actually did work here in making him more fresh-faced looking. Again, for years, I legit thought this sounded strange until I saw a movie with him in it before he shot Risky, and I totally get it now. Before any of the filming commenced, rehearsal time was given to the actors to work through specific scenes. There was also a period scheduled to letting them socialize in various places like malls, resulting in much better chemistry than had they gone in fresh. Principal production eventually started in early July of 1982 and would continue for 8 weeks until ending in late August. Of all the teenage characters, Curtis Armstrong was, in real life, the oldest at 28, with his portrayal of Miles being based on a fellow high school student he knew. This would be Armstrong's first feature film. Prior to this, he had only done stage work. Cruise by this point had done 4 pictures, but was not the mega star that he would become until a few years later with Top Gun. Armstrong describes Tom back then as being a goofy, slightly awkward, and insecure kid. He also points out that this was probably one of the last films before Tom Cruise became Tom Cruise, but he was starting to show traces of it. For example, he never called Curtis by his real name nor any of the other members of the cast, as confirmed by a few of them in later interviews. It was just another element of his method acting attempt, similar to when Costner decided Robin Hood should have an American accent, but didn't inform anyone of this until some grip asked the director, why the fuck is Robin Hood from Idaho? Rebecca De Mornay was a bit uneasy during filming at first due to clashes reportedly with the director's vision of Lana being a fast-talking, street-smart sex worker. Instead, she stood her ground and took her time as it naturally worked out for the better. She was also probably a bit stressed due to the fact that she was hooking up with Cruise while her then boyfriend was visiting the set. Oh, and that guy was this dude called Harry Dean Stanton. So while De Mornay is working, Harry Dean Stanton stayed at a hotel nearby and just fucking did laps back and forth in the pool for hours. Armstrong noted this and that his stamina was fucking insane for a man of his age, which he supposes it would have to have been if he was dating 23-year-old Rebecca De Mornay. Basically, Tom and Rebecca would attempt to fool around whenever they could, but because Harry Dean Stanton fucking Stanton.
The world's greatest character actor, Harry Dean Stanton.
One of the great character actors of all time. Hollywood royalty. Fucking sang an Everly Brothers song with Art Garfield at a goddamn AFI tribute to Nicholson.
His dream.
Has been in over 200 films and TV shows combined. Harry Dean Stanton. It's just mind-blowing that this was going on during production because there has never been any kind of information about this revealed until Armstrong's book came out in 2017. Anyways, because Harry Dean Stanton was around a lot, Tom and Rebecca kept things cool for the most part. After all, Tom was thought to be a bit of an altar boy. That assumption was questioned when Armstrong once asked him to come out for drinks after a day of filming was done. Cruise declined because he wanted to go work out, study lines, and read the Bible before bed. When Curtis was walking back to his hotel room later, he noticed a group of women lined up outside Tom's. At even just 19, Cruise was said to be incredibly ambitious and heavily serious about his career as an actor and would let nothing get in his way. Armstrong wrote down his impression of this entity in the making called Tom Cruise. He's an interesting character. Can't really make him out. He would appear to be on the brink of a great career. But when it comes to doing things with him, socially or professionally, he's not terribly reliable. Always late, very casual with other people's time. But in spite of it all, it's difficult not to like him. Though it's early days, the rehearsing I've done with him has gone smoothly. No arrogance or selfishness there. Yet, we'll see. Speaking of filming, the first scene that they did is where Joel is playing poker with his friends. Prior to capturing it on film, it was one of the rehearsed sequences, and with improv tossed in, it led to some bizarrely personal reactions, mainly from Tom. Actually, only from Tom. Here's where we properly introduce another first-time actor who would later become a household name, Bronson Pinchot. Pre-Beverly Hills Cop and Perfect Strangers, Bronson portrays Barry, another of Joel's friends who tends to be the most comedic relief of the bunch, but in a subtle, awkward teenager type way. I also don't know if Pinchot had prior experience with improv, but his comedic timing and skills seem to be way better here than Tom's. In fact, during one of these improv poker table readings, Pinchot as Barry called Tom as Joel a slutfucker. Cruise got incredibly distraught and said he, as Joel, didn't fuck sluts. Armstrong found the situation funny with Cruise's weird meta reaction, and things actually got tense until Pinchot broke it up by repeatedly saying, "Joel, don't do this to me." You can sort of see a glimpse of this in a reaction from Cruise in the film. He looks a little too flustered, and this is before anybody gave him crap about jumping on sofas or space aliens. It's worth mentioning that when they actually shot this scene, real booze and cigars were provided, so props department, go fuck yourself. In a 2009 interview with the AV Club, Pinchot recalled what he remembers most about working with the young Tom Cruise. He was tense and made constant unrelated homophobic comments, like specifically, "You want some ice cream in case there are no gay people in there?" His lingo was larded with the most... There was no basis for it. It was like, "It's a nice day, I'm glad there are no gay people standing here." Cruise's crude attitude and method acting bullshit may have been influenced by his best friend at the time, Sean Penn. The 22-year-old actor was in Chicago filming Bad Boys and would visit Cruise whenever he had free time. Like, all the time. He was apparently on set quite a lot, and it would lead to him getting a non-visible cameo in the film as the passenger of Mr. Goodson's Porsche when Joel pulls out of the driveway. Cruise and Penn had worked together on Taps a year earlier, becoming pretty close pals, and from Armstrong's observations, it seemed as if a lot of Penn rubbed off onto Tom. Getting closer to the end of filming, early August saw Fast Times at Ridgemount High released, and no doubt served as a massive ego boost to Penn. He was already heavily into method acting by this point and known to be quite unpredictable. To give you an idea of where this kid's mindset was at the time, he showed Armstrong a photo of himself dangling from a 20-story hotel balcony, which he had sent to a bond company that was providing insurance for Bad Boys. Tom admired Sean like he was a saint or something, like he once revealed to Armstrong his intimidation from Penn's talent, claiming Sean was the greatest actor of their generation. When not bragging about each other, Cruise and Penn boasted about actor Timothy Hutton, whom they had worked with on Taps. They would boast about him to annoying lengths, claiming Hutton was king shit on the set of Taps, even while being billed alongside motion picture legend George C. Scott of Man Getting Hit by Football fame.
Ah, my groin!
Sean Penn's influence on Tom continued by turning his once neat hotel room into a rock star's nightmare. Or as Armstrong describes it, it looked as if somebody blew up a convention of rising young 80s actors. Scents of cigarettes and booze and white male musk filled the air. Actors. With production dying down at this point, Armstrong went through a lengthy period of boredom and depression when his set calls became fewer and fewer. It was sort of a relapse from having worked long hours on his first film. The excitement of it all created this high that, when it began to wear off, made him feel self-pity while turning to alcohol and drug abuse. There's a lot of this he doesn't put into detail in his book, and I don't blame him for keeping it out. During post-production, Warner Brothers wanted director Paul Brickman to add more sexual imagery. Brickman was able to avoid this due to successful test screenings, but he couldn't escape the demand to change the ending. This is where Geffen comes back into the picture in a negative way. He felt the ending was too much of a downer and wanted it adjusted. The negotiations for changing the ending took upwards of somewhere over half a year. Brickman and producer John Abnett fought back consistently, with Brickman having an ace up his sleeve in knowing he had not finished the mix yet and he would be the only one to do it. The studio then allegedly said they were talking to a television director to shoot the new ending. Worried they might try to reshoot even more content, Brickman gave in by making an agreement to protect the majority of the film from changes while sacrificing the end. Cruise and DeMornay were brought in for filming of the new ending months later. Because of the long period for discussions, a premiere and cast and crew screenings were cancelled. While Brickman's original ending was later released as a DVD bonus, it was never officially used in a director's cut. Whether or not the original ending works better is really up to your personal preference of what you feel Joel and Lana's true motives are. Brickman also felt frustrated after seeing Warner's marketing campaign was trying to sell the film as a new Porky's, a teen sex comedy complete with a mock-up image that would eventually become the official poster. Brickman also fought with the studio over this as it did not depict the finished product. I'll argue that while the poster is iconic looking, it really doesn't have anything to do with the film's tone. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, Pinchot and Armstrong walked the streets of New York City, remaining in touch by becoming struggling actor chums. Almost a full year later, in June of 1983, they were thrilled to hear that a trailer for Risky Business had been attached to the newly released Superman 3. Not wanting to stay for the worst entry in the Superman franchise, Armstrong got Pinchot to call up the theater manager and ask for passes, which they were granted. Their deserved ego boost was rightfully earned, as they had not worked on a film production in the time since finishing Risky, and were relying on each other's enthusiasm that red carpet pastures await. At some point before its theatrical release 2 months later, Cruise and DeMornay met up with Armstrong and Pinchot for dinner while they were in New York City. Armstrong notes, "It was a strangely formal occasion. We dined on starched white tablecloths and talked about the vagaries of show business, and there was certainly no drunken striptease at 2 a.m. to top it off." This would be the last time he saw or spoke to Tom. As August rolled around, both Pinchot and Armstrong attended the very first screening they could find of Risky Business, a 1 p.m. matinee in an offbeat Times Square theater. Armstrong would later cross paths with DeMornay in 1987 at the wedding of Bruce Willis and Demi Moore. But even by that point, a mere 4 years later, Risky Business felt like a memory from much longer ago. Armstrong's parting words about his first film experience are downbeat but true. It's really sad to think that this film had its moment in the sun and then sorta disappeared while retaining only strings of pop culture significance that don't really reflect the greatness it exudes. And I know that there's thousands upon thousands of films that have been chewed up and spit out. I produced a lot of them. But this is one of the cases where there's still elements that are relevant in the film, but they're not the ones that we should be solely acknowledging. Basically, this movie lives off of sunglasses and a stupid dance sequence. The Ray-Ban Wayfarer sunglasses became insanely hot in fashion, and reports indicate that their sales went up way over margin after people saw Joel Goodson wear them around at night like a tool. And then there's this.
Just take those old records on.
This sequence became one of the great scenes in film history.
What an iconic moment. Were you aware on that day when you were filming that scene that it would be as memorable as it is?
And it's just bonkers because it honestly could be cut from the film and there would be nothing different. Here, I'll even do it. A lot of people used to say it was hot and crap, but it's just embarrassing. We're watching a kid dance around to a Bob Seger song in his underwear.
I mean, that's something that I did as a kid at home.
What, dancing in your jocks around?
Yeah.
It really doesn't fit the rest of this brooding, life lesson-laced film. But you know what does? 2 words, Tangerine Dream. Soundtrack-wise, director Paul Brickman had a big hand in shaping it, as many of the song choices were ones he made initially. When it came to the score, he really wanted something unique for a comedy that created a mood, helped tell the story, and really embraced the dark tone. While originally looking at using Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians, Brickman came across German synth pioneers Tangerine Dream. Their original concept was actually rejected. Apparently it was too much in the style of a teen movie. Brickman and producer John Abnett still felt there was something special with Tangerine Dream, so they traveled to Berlin during post-production to work on it. At the time, the group was working out of a converted church studio and only at night. For 10 days, they worked on getting the score perfect, but for the first 6 days, not one piece of music worked out. Brickman and Abnett recalled that they were incredibly frustrated at the time due to all the fighting with the studio over the ending of the film, and now the additional stress that they may not have a composer still for the score. Then, on the 7th day, they were presented with this. The score for Risky Business is a character of its own. It adds so much to the atmosphere, doesn't overstay its welcome, and was a unique choice at a time when synth-based scores were still in their infancy. Some of the songs used here are also remixes of pre-existing Tangerine Dream tracks. There's a few tracks that made it to the soundtrack release, and some cues would show up on a rare audio movie kit album for promotional use, but in general, a good portion of their cues from the film were never officially released. This led to bootleg versions of sorts. I remember trying desperately to find any of these off Napster with limited success. I somehow managed to get a few of the recordings from the audio movie kit, and even that was a long shot. Tangerine Dream's Edgar Froese, a founding member of the group, would later inform Brickman that 60 to 70% of the band's success was due to this project. Judging by the Napster comment, you can kind of tell when I saw this film. I was probably a year or two younger than Joel's character. I grew up in the burbs. My parents went away. I got into some shenanigans. I thought drinking beer was edgy and cool, all before champagne. Anyways, this movie had a profound impact on me in various ways, but I unexpectedly got the sense that I wasn't alone when it came to the uncertainty of a post-secondary education. Though I didn't so much go through transition anxiety, I sort of knew what I wanted to do with myself, but I just wasn't 100% certain. I considered taking a victory lap, which is essentially just doing another year of school without the necessity for course credits, as I would have already technically completed high school, but I felt that choice could lead to my missing out on a potential opportunity that may not be open for me in the future. An incident took place before all this that made me truly understand the importance of not only this decision in life, but the impact taking a year of school away can have on an undetermined student. Near the end of the first semester in my last year at Robert Downey Senior High, the Christmas break had officially started with classes ending for the day, and I dipped into my theater professor's office to shoot the usual shit. After talking over a scotch about how great the latest episode of the OC was, he began to ask me how things were going with college applications and if I was looking forward to finishing high school. I told him that I wanted to get into television, but I wasn't super certain and maybe leaning towards a victory lab. He straight out said it was a great option, in fact probably the best option, because he acknowledged that a lot of the kids going straight into college and university weren't exactly ready yet. It doesn't have to do with smarts, and it doesn't have to do with academic experience. It's a very big step in life, and not everybody is ready at that point to make it. I mean, think about it. Some families send their kids off on their own for the first time ever in a totally different city in another part of the country. Maybe some of their friends are at the same school, but even then, you're going head first in a totally different environment with no direct guidance or potentially even experience in the workplace. And yeah, I agree that there's merits to this, like learning self-reliance, but not when it's done in a forceful way. My theater professor went on to point out that there's a lot of pressure from parents involved. They want their kids to succeed and neglect to think that maybe they should take a year or so to work a job and figure things out. The victory lap is an option that, from studies, continues to be a norm in the education system and does not deserve to be looked down upon. I can attest to this because I wound up doing it and had a phenomenal semester, perhaps my favorite year of high school. So while I relished in my choice, would things be different for Joel Goodson had he done the same? You know, would he get into an Ivy League school eventually? Or would he get a chance again to dance around the house in his underwear to a Bob Seger song? Okay, let's get past the dancing bit. There's some really good performances here and natural chemistry among the actors, a lot of which again are first-timers. You really get a sense that Joel is good buddies with Miles and Barry, who are both in the same boat as him when it comes to paving the road towards their future educations. Supporting actors like Joe Pantoliano and Richard Masur are great. I usually just call Richard Bill Rutherford from Princeton in anything I see him in. Pantoliano is creepy, and I'm pretty surprised Geffen wanted him off the project. Tom Cruise is also really good. Like, he exudes a charismatic innocence as Joel, and it's wild to see him as the non-superstar that he would eventually become. Like, a lot of the flack towards this movie comes from his current incarnation, so try to put that aside and witness the last remnants of his purity on film. Sex workers are also portrayed in a much more realistic and positive approach than in most films from this era. They're doing their jobs, nothing more than that, and the movie doesn't look down on them for doing so. Joel isn't the proverbial white knight who wants to save Lana. In fact, there's no indication that she plans to leave sex work at the end of the film.
I'm really trying to be friends with you. But I'd appreciate it if you'd stop laying these little judgments on me while you're leaning on your daddy's $40,000 car.
There's a trans character that is perhaps the most likable and down-to-earth role in the entire film, and she isn't thrown in for a quick gag. She has a purpose in terms of the plot by introducing Joel to Lana and appears to be a much more nuanced character despite very little screen time. The sex scenes between Joel and Lana are minimal and done very artistically, going for a mature presentation to further separate this from the other sex comedies that Warner Brothers thought it would be associated with. This film often gets labeled as a comedy, but I believe its pure form is that of a drama. If there is a joke, it's always at the expense of the boys, their immaturity, naivety, or lack of sexual experience. Nothing is over the top, silly, or jokey. There's no stereotypical frat boy gags, and no dumb catchphrase that people put on t-shirts. I've often contemplated taking a private jet out just to see the locations for this film. The suburban streets of Highland Park look incredibly cozy, but when you factor in everything regarding Joel's situation, you start to feel a sense of insecurity, and I just love it. Like, Joel still lives in the house he grew up in on the street he used to play on, and now he's being confronted by a total stranger who knows where he sleeps at night. That's fucking terrifying for a suburbanite when the city encroaches on the burbs. I can't say enough about the music. Had the film gone with a different score, it would not have the same effect at all. That's how important the music by Tangerine Dream is. Now, where does Risky Business fit in the world of today? It's considered to be the film that launched the career of one of the biggest film stars in history, and it has a stupid dance sequence that got parodied a lot. It did make money. On a budget of little over $6 million, Risky Business grossed $63.5, and you don't need to be a producer to know that's hella good. Numbers and stupid dance sequences aside, it's a movie that deserves the respect for not conforming to studio pressure to become a cookie-cutter sex comedy, but for being its own thing, a dark, dramatic look at adolescence and the risky business that comes with it.
Really, if you haven't seen it yet, definitely add it to your list of stuff to watch because there's a lot going on there than just a fucking dance sequence. That's about it for now. You can let yourself out of my office and we'll do lunch.